A police officer's routine stop uncovers hidden racism, quickly spiraling out of control. As tensions rise, he's forced to face the consequences of his actions. The truth will leave everyone questioning who's really in power. Officer Jameson Taylor patrolled the desolate part of town, a neighborhood littered with abandoned shops and crumbling buildings. It was the kind of place that gave him a bad feeling, a sense of lawlessness. His frustration boiled as he scanned the streets. There were no cameras, no witnesses, just a stretch of broken-down homes and a few stragglers who looked out of place. In the distance, he spotted an elderly black woman standing outside a boarded-up corner store. She clutched a plastic grocery bag, her wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over her face. Her coat, too large for her small frame, obscured much of her body, making Jameson uneasy. Something about her just didn't sit right. What was she doing here? Jameson approached, his hand instinctively hovering near his holster. "Ma'am," he called, his voice firm, "I need to see some ID." The woman didn't flinch. She blinked slowly, her face calm, almost serene, as if the tension rolling off him didn't faze her. "I'm just heading home," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper, but full of certainty. Jameson's fingers tightened around his belt. "ID, now." Without a word, the woman reached into her pocket and handed over her identification. Asterisk, asterisk, Evelyn Jones, asterisk, asterisk, it read. The address listed wasn't far from here, just a couple of blocks away. Jameson looked at her groceries. Milk, canned food, a loaf of bread. Ordinary items. Yet, his authority felt challenged by her calmness. He handed back the ID, unwilling to admit defeat. "What are you really doing out here, Mrs. Jones?" Evelyn's eyes didn't waver. "I told you. I'm going home." There was no defiance in her voice, only truth. But it was that calmness, that unshaken demeanor, that set something off in him. Jameson hated that she wasn't scared, that she wasn't like the others who would scramble at his orders. His breath quickened, frustration giving way to anger. He stepped closer, his face inches from hers. "You're in the wrong place at the wrong time," he snarled, trying to force fear into her eyes. But she didn't back down. She didn't even blink. A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint rustle of the wind. Evelyn's quiet strength unnerved him more than he wanted to admit. His badge felt heavy, like a weight pulling him down. "Let go of me," she said softly, her voice cutting through his anger like a knife. Jameson snapped. His fist flew before he could stop it, landing hard against her cheek. Evelyn stumbled back, her cane clattering to the ground. The sound echoed through the empty street, louder than it had any right to be. For a moment, the world stopped. Jameson stood frozen, his heart pounding in his ears as the gravity of what he had just done sank in. He had hit an elderly woman, a defenseless, elderly black woman. But Evelyn didn't crumple like he had expected. Slowly, painfully, she straightened herself up, her eyes never leaving his. A trickle of blood ran from the corner of her mouth, but she wiped it away with the back of her hand, her gaze piercing. There was no fear, no pain in her expression, only a calm, unnerving resolve. She reached into her coat, and for a split second, Jameson tensed, wondering if she had a weapon. But what she pulled out wasn't a gun or a knife. It was a badge, an FBI badge. The metal gleamed in the dull streetlight, almost mocking him. His stomach dropped. "You just assaulted a federal officer," she said, her tone eerily calm. "Doesn't matter what you didn't know. The damage is done." Jameson's world spun. He had attacked an FBI agent. His mind scrambled for an excuse, for something, anything that would undo what had just happened. But there was nothing. No way out. Evelyn pulled out her phone, dialing with one hand while keeping her eyes locked on his. "Backup will be here in a few minutes," she said, as though they were discussing the weather. The distant wail of sirens cut through the air, growing louder with each passing second. Jameson's chest tightened. He was paralyzed, his feet glued to the ground. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was crumbling around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The flashing lights appeared, and within moments, 2 black SUVs rolled up. FBI agents in dark suits emerged, their faces hard and unreadable. One tall agent, clearly in charge, approached Evelyn, giving her a respectful nod before turning to Jameson with a look of disgust. "You're under arrest for assaulting a federal officer," the agent said, his voice cold and final. Jameson couldn't speak, his throat constricted, his mind blank. This was it. The end. His hands shook as the cuffs clicked around his wrists, the cold metal biting into his skin. Evelyn watched silently as they led him away, her mind already moving forward. This was only the beginning. She had been working undercover for months, gathering evidence of the corruption that ran deep within Jameson's department. This arrest was just the first step in a long process of unraveling the toxic web of abuse and power that officers like him had spun. Inside the precinct, panic spread like wildfire. As FBI agents combed through files and computer logs, it became clear that Jameson wasn't acting alone. The corruption reached higher than anyone had imagined, implicating senior officers who had turned a blind eye, or worse, encouraged the behavior. In the interrogation room, Jameson sat across from Evelyn, his face pale, his eyes hollow. She laid the evidence out in front of him. Emails, messages, logs of conversations with his superiors. He was part of something much bigger than just a simple assault. "You can help yourself," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "If you talk, if you give us names, there might be a way out for you. But if you stay silent, you go down with the rest of them." Jameson's hands clenched into fists. He wanted to fight, to argue, but deep down, he knew she was right. The walls were closing in, and there was no escaping what was coming. Slowly, reluctantly, he nodded. He named names. Asterisk, asterisk. Captain Reynolds, asterisk, asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk. Lieutenant Stevens, asterisk, asterisk. Other officers who had looked the other way, who had allowed the abuse of power to thrive in their ranks. The investigation blew wide open, pulling in dozens of officers who had participated in or enabled the corruption. The precinct was torn apart from the inside. Senior officers were arrested, entire units disbanded, and the community, once terrorized by the very people meant to protect them, began to breathe a little easier. But for Evelyn, the fight was far from over. The system was rotten, and rooting out the corruption was only the first step. She stood at the edge of the protest, watching as people marched through the streets with signs demanding justice, demanding accountability. The victory was real, but the road ahead was long, and as she turned away from the crowd, she knew she wasn't done, not by a long shot. What do you think should happen when those in power abuse their authority? Or have you ever been in a situation like this? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to subscribe. Your support is what motivates me to keep crafting these beautiful stories. Thank you for being here with me.